What about just sort of the general feeling right now that the media companies, Twitter and YouTube and Google, that there is some sort of censorship happening related to either algorithms or, banning certain people, like, Twitter, for example, they banned Milo, but, they'll have, the alt-right Richard Spencer's on there and verified. Again, you don't have to comment on the specifics of that, but just the general, like, these companies are so close to government right now, and this is our information highway right here.
This is a toughie. This is where I might use that line that I mentioned earlier.
I see. You set me up with it.
Yeah, but it's not because I couldn't have an opinion, but I feel like I would have an obligation to actually sit down with people who work at Facebook, Twitter, and these places, because I know a lot of people at all these companies, and have a real factual discussion about what's going on. At this point, I do think at the very least, if we're going to deal with banning or preventing certain types of people from voicing their opinions, there should be a consistent playing field, right? It shouldn't be moving goalposts. Mm-hmm. So the rules should be clear from the outset, and they should apply to everyone. And there shouldn't be one-off exceptions, I think, in most cases. When we get into algorithms and what is rewarded and what is not, there are always unintended consequences of the best design, whether that is an algorithm or if there's an incentive structure, right? I mean, if you incentivize any of your workers, let's say within an organization with certain types of sales quotas and bonuses and so on, there are always going to be sort of perverse side effects of those incentives. That's always the case. So I think that it's, in a way, it's on one hand rational and important that we have high standards for how people serve and curate data, so that we're not proliferating fake news, and that can't be used as a weapon of propaganda in a very damaging capacity. Simultaneously, I think it's unreasonable to expect that all of these gigantic companies who are dealing with technology and platforms of a scale that is incomprehensible to most people who aren't sitting down and being shown what it looks like on some level by, say, an employee of Google. It's hard to even fathom what being Google means. So it's unfair
Right.
to expect them to get all the details right all the time. It's an evolving system, so they're going to make mistakes, and it's good to hold them to a high standard, but difficult to expect perfection as they try to improve it. So that I would put safely in the category of I'm going to reserve judgment until I have more information.
I think that was a pretty solid answer for reserving judgment. I mean, you still gave me something there. How do you decide who to trust? When you're getting your information, you're talking to people from, I mean, in your case, quite literally every walk of life probably that there is. How do you decide who or what news organization or whatever else that you actually feel is doing a fair, impartial job?
I don't trust organizations in general, but I will try to identify specific people. And if I'm really trying to do triage, I will identify people in my circle of friends or in my network who may not be specialists in the domain that I'm looking at, whether that's, say, cancer research or fill in the blank, San Francisco local politics and how to most affect change with a given proposition. It could be super specific. Mm-hmm. I will reach out to 2 or 3 of my friends who I think will have already tried to vet good sources of information, or simply good thinking. So it could be people who are good at interpreting the information, people who are acting as human aggregators and filters. I'll almost go out immediately to those people. For instance, I very frequently bump into people because I'm reasonably involved with both current and former military. So I've spent time at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey. Certainly have a lot of friends who are former military. And you bump into a lot of folks running around calling themselves Navy SEALs. And a lot of them are exaggerating what they've done. There are some very, very legitimate folks, And then there are a lot of people who drive the legitimate folks crazy because all they actually did was pass buds, were never deployed. Now they're running around selling Navy SEAL workout routines and getting book deals.
Right.
So if in a case like that, I will immediately go to 2 or 3 of my friends who are from that community and say, hey, sniff test, 0 to 10. How much would you recommend I talk to this person? So it's a very hands-on process. I start from effectively a place of distrust with any mass media because the incentives are not aligned with truth at all costs. They just are not. And unfortunately, that's, I think, the reality of the business models of many of these companies. So even the individual participants, however much they may want to represent difficult or to divulge and discuss difficult truths, are disincentivized from doing so because it may be so nuanced that only 5% of the target audience will take the time to understand it and discuss it. But when you're trying to monetize on a CPM basis, the number of slideshows you can put on a website, then you run into a conflict very quickly. Yeah. So that's unfortunate challenge of trying to siphon news. Another thing that I'll use, and I have no affiliation with this, is a program called Nuzzle, Nuzzel. And what that will do is it will aggregate the most shared stories from the people I follow on Twitter. And it creates a digest of, say, the top 10 stories that have been shared the most by the people I have already selected to follow. And I found that very useful. But at any point, for instance, right now or near presidential elections, really within 6 months on either side, it's just 99% noise. But at other periods, it can be a very, very useful source of pre-filtered information from folks I've already handpicked to follow on, say, Twitter. So for pattern matching, that's been very helpful for me.
Yeah, it's funny because I expected and hoped that after the election we'd have like a little bit of a lull with politics one way or another. And it's almost like everything has just been ramped up even more. I'm curious, when you talk about, picking some people that you trust and things like that, you are also from Long Island. And I've mentioned on the show a couple times before that one of my great joys over the course of the election is that I was involved in a group text with 3 of my old childhood from middle school friends. And we sort of reconnected over politics, arguing all the time. One of the guys was a huge Trump guy, one was a huge Bernie guy, one was somewhere in between. And then me, and I thought, these are people I trust. Like, I knew them from childhood. I know where they come from. I knew their families, celebrated holidays with them, all of that stuff. Do you have a couple of people in your life like that?
Who I have completely diverging opinions?
Well, diverging opinions, but also that you have like the long history from childhood that maybe you're outside of what you do normally, that you can go to and be like, what do you think about stuff,
Oh, for sure. For sure. Absolutely. I mean, I just came back from a bachelor party for one of my oldest friends I've known since we were kids. And very eclectic group of guys who got to know one another before anyone was really entrenched in a given career or anything like that. And it's very refreshing to have, I think, and healthy to have those friends who really there's no potential, or at least I don't think so, with these guys, certainly not, any type of ulterior motive or professional motivation. There's just none of that BS and noise and static and nonsense. So yes, I do have those folks for sure.
Yeah. How do you deal with that part of it, that because of the nature of what you do and the public persona around you, people must want things from you all the time?
Yeah. Oh yeah, they do. And it's a tax that I've accepted I have to pay. And I think it would be unreasonable for me to complain about it, since it is a byproduct of public exposure, which I've opted into. But it can be frustrating. I mean, there are times when people will approach me and they'll try to butter me up for a few weeks and do me. It's always a tip off when I start getting a lot of unsolicited favors from someone who doesn't want anything, and I'm like, I bet you're going to send me a book in 2 weeks that I don't want to read with the expectation that I'm going to give you a blurb. I bet that's what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, that's exactly what happens. So I've had to set policies that allow me to turn off entire categories of requests. Like, I don't do book forwards. I don't do book blurbs. I don't do fill in the blank. Across the board, 100%, just don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And every once in a blue moon, I'll make an exception for someone I know really well, but it's very, very rare. Or for instance, right now, like I'm not doing startup investing. So if you think you're going to come to a conference and talk to me about 2 or 3 things you found on my Wikipedia page to try to develop some rapport and then pitch me or startup at the end of the night, not going to happen.
Oh man, I was gonna hit you up because we're growing pretty rapidly here, but a little seed money, you know what I'm saying?
And that happens all the time. It's unbelievable. I mean, I've had people in San Francisco. This is very unique to the somewhat like Asperger's romanticizing nature of Silicon Valley. But I mean, I've had people. I'm sitting at a dinner with, say, a girlfriend, and they will literally come up, pull up a chair, sit down, and just start pitching. Apropos of nothing, no intro, no nothing. I had one guy at South by Southwest. I've had at least 12 guys try to pitch me while I'm standing at a urinal, which is not the right time.
Not a
to do
good
such
time.
thing.
You got to have a serious elevator pitch at that point.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how good your pitch is, and it goes on. But I would say it's a tax that I've had to accept, but I'm much more cautious about any open-ended invite to have a conversation or a coffee or a dinner. So if someone says, "Hey, can I introduce you to my friend Joe? He wants to grab a cup of coffee or like would love to come to dinner with us." I'm like, okay, if Joe wanted something from me, what would it be?
Right.
Like, what would you guess? And I want to know in advance. Like, it's okay to have a pitch, but I want to know what it is beforehand.
Yeah.
So that's how I think of it these days.
All right. Well, let's finish up by actually talking about your new book. Are you willing to talk about your new book?
I am willing. I know, twist the arm, but I'll go for it.
All right. Let's see what we can do here. So, Tools of Titans. So this is basically the collection of the best ideas, the best practices that some of the most interesting people that you've talked to over the past couple of years have put into practice. So I guess the easiest question at first would be, is there just a general theme with these heavy hitters, with these people who are doing it that we all would want to emulate and be like and learn from? What is the general theme?
Yeah, I'll answer that. And I would say also that Tools of Titans was really never intended to be a book. It was just a notebook that I was compiling for my own use. Mm-hmm. So I was going back over my own notes to grab the most actionable routines and tools, gadgets, anything that I could apply immediately and test from all of these different guests. And one of the themes, well, I would say that first, it's split into 3 sections, and this is how a lot of these guests think about their lives: healthy, wealthy, and wise. And the healthy is first because the most prolific thinkers and creatives in the book have also come to highly prioritize physical function. Mm-hmm. And that manifests in a lot of ways. But for instance, Rick Rubin, one of the most legendary music producers of the last 50 years, introduced me to something called Chili Pad, which I won't get too far into it, but it allows you to very precisely set the temperature of the sheet that you lay on in your bed. And it's been a complete game changer for me. Wow. And many other people. And that also came up with super athletes. So you find a lot of commonalities in the top 1% of multiple fields. In other words, they have more in common, even though it might be chess, military strategist, black market chemist, you name it. The top 1% in all those fields have a lot in common, more so than they have in common with the B players in their own fields. So that was really cool to see. All of them, I would say, are very good at asking seemingly absurd questions. So that is a commonality across the whole gang. So you would have, say, there are a bunch of billionaires in the book, like the Reid Hoffmans and Peter Thiels and Mark Andreessens. There are a lot of folks. Peter Thiel, I think, is a very good example. So he asks questions like, and I'm paraphrasing, but why can't you accomplish your 10-year plan in the next 6 months? Right? All right. Well, that's a very bold question. And if you're going to think on that and as many people in this book do, journal on it and actually sit down in freehand on that question for 3 pages, let's just say, then you have to temporarily put aside the constraints and assumptions that have led you to where you are. Because if it's your 10-year plan, you've set a time frame and sort of an incremental approach that doesn't work at all if you're trying to cram it into 6 months.
Right.
So all of a sudden, you have to come up with these very, very potentially outlandish and absurd, unconventional answers. And what I've found also, and these two go together, is that, so for instance, Larry Page, co-founder of Google, has said, and I'm going to paraphrase this, but what people miss about really big, audacious goals is that it's hard to fail completely. So you'll very often fail above everyone else's success, even if it's only a partial win. So you find a lot of that, like Peter Diamandis, chairman of the X Prize, who's working on all these different exponential technologies and spends a lot of time with people like Ray Kurzweil, James Cameron, and so on. When entrepreneurs are pitching him to try to get investment, he will ask them, and I'm paraphrasing all of these, but if you had to 10x the economics of your business in the next 3 months, what would you do? And if their response is that's impossible, he responds with, I don't accept that answer, try again.
Right.
And so, but to get unusual output and to find paths that are unique, that are not well trodden, you have to ask better questions. So I'd say that's very, very common. More than 80% of the people in the book also have some type of mindfulness practice, which could take the form of meditation, say using a guided meditation. There's one that came up a few times, which is free, called the 2010 Summer Smile Meditation, which is by Tara Brach. Super specific. But that one came up multiple times, for instance, or people using Headspace in the mornings. Arnold Schwarzenegger ended up using transcendental meditation for a year, twice a day, and then saw benefits for decades afterwards, which is really wild when you think about it. Other commonalities, so I ask almost all of the guests, what book have you gifted most to other people?
Yeah.
There are certain books that popped up over and over again that are maybe lesser known, like Poor Charlie's Almanac by Charlie Munger, who's Warren Buffett's right-hand man, but who gets less of the media spotlight because I think he, quite frankly, hates being in the spotlight. He's a pretty cantankerous dude, but incredible book that came up repeatedly with some of the wealthiest people. Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse came up repeatedly by some of the best musicians and investors. Go figure, right? So there are, Sapiens was another one that came up across the board repeatedly. So these are the types of things that you spot. There's some weird ones, like males over the age of, say, 45, very high percentage of them don't eat breakfast at all or only eat one primary meal per day, usually an early dinner. That came up a lot. So you have...
And that's totally against conventional wisdom, right?
Yeah, it's for the most part runs completely counter to conventional wisdom. But if you look into the scientific literature, which I've done, even for females, it appears as though there's some data to suggest that as you get older, you actually consume protein, for instance, better in a single large bolus, a single large dose. So rather than having, like a bodybuilder, a meal every 4 hours or whatever it is, even 3 meals a day, if you're a 70-year-old, 80-year-old, you'll actually consume your protein more efficiently, having the majority in one meal. And go figure. So it seems to correspond. But there's a bunch of weird stuff like that pops up over and over.
Have any of these titans told you something or given you some wisdom that you tried to put into practice and then were like, man, that does not work for me?
Yes, definitely. And the good news is, for every pattern, there's someone who will let you off the hook. That's the good news. So you can really, the objective is to create your own bespoke toolkit, right? And for instance, there are a lot of people who wake up very early. You have people, Amelia Boone, who's this incredible super athlete, Jocko Willink, a long list of folks who wake up at, say, 4:30 in the morning. So I've tried that, but I'm much better going to bed around 4:30 in the morning. And so I would lean more towards, say, the BJ Novaks, writers and comedians and so on, who can't even really hit their groove until 11 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
That's more my speed. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the waking up with the Amish, not my thing.
Yeah.
I can't really make that work for me. Not anytime soon.
Yeah. So do you think some of this is just how you're hardwired versus how you can actually learn to train yourself? Like something like that, I would guess that knowing you, you could probably overcome that if you put enough time into it. You may not feel that that's worthy of putting time into, but how much is that battle between just the way you're hardwired and nature versus the desire to change yourself?
Well, I think you can. The good news is that everything in Tools of Titans is intended to be a 1 day or a 1 week experiment, right? So you can try it, and as Bruce Lee said, something along these lines, he said, "Accept what is useful, reject what is useless, add what is uniquely your own." So I've tried to do the morning thing, and I'm just better
Yeah.
going to bed late and waking up late, and I'm okay with that. I've accepted that. I don't beat myself up over it, and uh, there is definitely a hardwiring component. I mean, some people need only 3 hours of sleep per night. I know a bunch of these mutants. The vast majority of people will do best on, say, 7.5 to 10 hours of sleep per night. And I would say maybe 30% of the people I've spoken to that I've talked to about this will try to get some type of short nap in the, say, mid-afternoon, like between kind of 2:30 and 4 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So there are certain personalized elements that are dependent on your genetic makeup, or at least influenced by your genetic makeup. But I mean, reality is more negotiable than I think people realize. Even that stuff, you can override it if you want to for periods of time. You can use something like polyphasic sleep and combine that with something called exogenous ketones. It's this powdered form of alternate energy, basically. You combine those two things, you could probably do like 2.5 hours of sleep per day for a few weeks at a time. And I've done that before in dire situations, but it's not something you want to try to sustain for.
Yeah. Man, I should have talked to you about a month ago, because I could have used it this month. All right, I'm going to end this with the most softball question of all time. If you had one book that you wanted people to go out and read right now, go out and buy a book, you know what I mean? Digital, hard copy, whatever it is. What book would that be?
I would have to recommend, not biased, I would have to recommend Tools of Titans, because this is the first book I enjoyed writing, and it is the first book that I have, since writing, reread multiple times, because the tools and tactics and recommendations are not just mine. It's not me listening to myself. This is the best practices of 200 world-class performers from every possible discipline you can imagine. And as of right now on Amazon, I think it has 410 reviews straight. I mean, it's a 5-star average. It's like 87% have given it 5 stars.
Come on, I know you're refreshing as we're talking. Come on now.
Oh, yeah, no, the compulsive Amazon checking. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's no author, well, I shouldn't say no author I know who is immune to that during launch week, for sure.
You haven't hit that level of peace yet, of high level thinking yet.
No, during launch week, every author is just like a rat with a cocaine pellet dispenser checking Amazon, if we're being honest. But Tools of Titans is what I'd recommend. It's I think very appropriate for all age levels. Incredibly flexible gift. There's something in it for everybody, and it's really intended so you can sit down with a cup of tea or coffee and get a chapter in that period of time by the time you finish that cup. So it's a fun book, and very proud of it. So if people feel so inclined, I would encourage them to check out Tools of Titans.
All right, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put the link to Tools of Titans in the comment thing right down below, and we will see if the Dave Rubin effect is as powerful as the Tim Ferriss effect.
I can't wait to see it. And people can find retailers all over the world if they want, or Amazon and so on, at toolsoftitans.com. There are also some sample chapters forward from Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's wild. So yes, we will see what happens. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, man. Well, listen, I think we did over an hour here, and I know you only have a 4-hour work week, so I'm very appreciative of your time.
You're welcome. My pleasure, man.
All right, thanks to Tim Ferriss. You guys can follow him on the Twitter at Tim Ferriss. The link for Tools of Titans is right down below. And thanks for watching. We'll do it again next week.